A lot of claims came out of Berlin yesterday about the Russia-Ukraine war, about how they are close to peace, 90% of the way there, so they say. United States and Russia are close. Lots of statements from many European leaders, but when you get down to it, if we are honest with each other, and you know we love to be honest on this show, Russia is going to determine what the conditions are for a negotiated settlement. And if there is no agreement from the Russian side, then there will be a military victory. I hate to say it. I hate to be that categorical about it, but I don't see any rational path that leads to anywhere else where, whether it's the United States, Ukraine, or Europe, has the leverage to compel anything on the Russian side. And so in light of that, we want to bring in our guest today, Andreo Martyanov, one of our favorites here, who's a veteran author and Russian military expert, host of the YouTube channel Smoothie X12, who's always got also cuts right to the heart of the matter and tells us what the truth is from the Russian side. Welcome back to the show, Andrei.
My pleasure, always.
Well, listen, I mean, that's not what a lot of people want to hear. What I said right off the top there about this being basically that Russia is going to call the shots here. Now, a lot of people would say that, you're from the Russian side here, so that's what they would expect. But, I mean, lay out the case.
Yeah, it's many people blame it on the Russian rah-rah and you're biased, you're Russian. Many people forget actually that I am American citizen for a long time now, and I'm certainly, interested in the United States preserving itself as a great nation. It's a vested interest, so it's absolutely normal. But yeah, it's militarily, it has been already done. Latest today, is already Russian forces operate within the center of the Gulai Pole, which has a very symbolic significance for Ukraine, because it was this peasant anarchist, hot seat, so to speak, during the Russian Civil War. And it's when you look at what they're trying to do, mostly propaganda, like Zelensky doing this green screen, just trying to show that he isn't Kupiansk, in reality not. And Doug McGregor summed it up today, I think, very well. It's an excellent analogy. It's like eating the apple pie without apples. That's pretty much what is going on. So, and Russians just observe it like with in amusement, essentially, So, but yeah, it's United States will be afforded still some sort of the off-ramp, but obviously the more time passes, the worse and worse it will be for the United States. As for Ukraine and Europe, I mean, you have those losers, basically, and I'm sorry to say that, they sanctioned Colonel Jacques Beau, this is like ridiculous. I mean, this tells you how weak those people are, cowardly and, impudent and, in many respects. So, and when you look at it, because, they don't like to hear the real news, and they read propaganda primarily, and this is the extent of their actually professional qualities. And as a result, Russians say, you want to send troops, send them, we'll kill them all, and this is exactly what's going to happen. And when you look at the intensity now, and especially Odessa being worked in the last few days, and Odessa, Zatoka, all those, places which are critical for the access to the Black Sea. As Vladimir Putin stated, it looks like we have to, cut off Ukraine from the Black Sea. And this is happening right now. And the marine traffic.
In fact, I want to ask you a little bit. I want to do a little bit of diversion there. Gary, if you could pull that full screen up there about Odessa. There is an article on Russian media today that says an SBU colonel from Ukraine has said that Russian troops will not stop until they enter Odessa. This is what's being reported today. In his opinion, Moscow is not going to stop its troops now. It plans a much larger than the Donbass. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia will end when Russian troops enter Odessa, taking control of the entire coast. Kiev will lose the entire south of the country, and then everything will end. According to the author, he said to this colonel, the Russians are definitely not going to stop. This is confirmed by our military intelligence, our being Ukraine. Then he goes on to say the loss of access to the sea will be catastrophic for Ukraine, and the Russian Federation will try to take advantage of this in order to later draw the remnants of the country into its orbit. Everything else will be returned through the sphere of influence. You understand what it's like to leave a country without a sea. This is a country that will depend on the country that has access to the sea. How do you see that? Is that true, or is he just trying to scare everybody that they have to help Ukraine, or else Odessa is going to go by the wayside?
Yeah, it's a typical, panic mongering. This is not to say that Russians will not take Odessa, but it could be done in several different ways. We already discussed it, including, for example, after the regime in Kiev is removed, which is happening. And then, you know what, they will go probably the way of Donbass at some point of time, voting to join Russia, because obviously at this stage, Ukraine is not a viable state. So no matter what this kernel of SBU tries to project, reality is Ukraine is utterly bankrupt. It is not capable of sustaining itself economically, and it will continue. Actually, Russians will continue to reduce the industrial remnants, so to speak, of Ukraine, and especially now at the coastal regions of Odessa and Nikolaev, for example. So, and yeah, again, Odessa, Nikolaev, and all those places, they have nothing to do with Ukraine. It was a Russian Empire. It was Catherine the Great. It was Potemkin who were establishing those cities. These are classic Russian imperial cities of the 18th century. So in this case, whenever anybody claims that Ukraine at that time didn't exist, actually, it existed merely Ukraine being the fringe, which is that's how it translates, being nothing more than their land, essentially territory. And so in this case, he can say whatever he wants, this kernel of SBU, but it is entirely up to the military political leadership of Russia to decide how it's going to basically cut off Ukraine from the sea. For some reason, this magic sunk, Red Banner Black Sea Fleet popped up in existence suddenly a couple of days ago, and for some reason it goes to sea and launches missiles, and it can certainly provide a full naval blockade of Odessa if needed.
Yeah. Now I want to ask you an update on a couple of different things. One, actually, both of them from a certain perspective are negative from the Russian side. I want you to explain. Are these bigger issues than what is claimed on the Russian side, or is it an over-exaggeration on the Ukraine side? First of all, you mentioned a second ago about Zelensky's appearance allegedly before the sign in front of Kupiansk, but it does appear that there has been some pushback from the Russians out of portions of the city of Kupiansk. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there are no push. They try to stream in by those kamikaze dragged and, platoon-sized force especially through the Kupiansk cemetery. They are killed there. They left at the cemetery. So, but yeah, this is classic, Institute for the Study of War and Ukrainian propaganda. So yeah, they can claim whatever they want. I mean, but yeah, Kupiansk is fully under Russian control, and it doesn't matter what they throw in. Again, many people misunderstand. I misunderstand this whole thing. I actually did the review of field manual Army doctrinal publication 390 about what attack is, what offensive operations are, and things of this nature. So people, for some reason, think that, oh yeah, they have like 2 squads going in. They draw this huge red arrow. Yeah, they killed, that's it, so simple as that. There is no capability of Ukrainian armed forces to conduct any kind of the serious offensive operations. They simply have no resources, and they lack all critical points which are defined. Even that's why I use American, doctrinal publications to explain to people not to be accused of being Russian rah-rah. Obviously, I could have gone to Russian combat manuals, but even American combat manuals describe the fact that pretty much they lack any kind of force and reserves and resources to conduct any kind of offensive operations. What they look at is best, they have the platoon size force getting into the fray. And yeah, there are so many videos. They are just basically obliterated. You cannot do anything about it with the table of equipment and organization equipment from 1990s or even 2000, when Russians have 24/7 tactical and situational awareness, not just by drones. Any movement of the force is immediately registered and the appropriate measures are taken. And as the result, they claim, hey, they are, conducting offensive operation in the westward direction. So That's probably how they fight. They came up even with a new operational term, rocket. What rocket, parallel to the frontline roads. They say it's rocket offensives now. So moving reserves up and down the front line, they call it offensive. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing to really say more about it. But yes, they will continue.
Yeah. So it does. One of the things that I thought even when the first reports came in, even if they had all been accurate, and there had been a pretty big tactical push, at least on the outskirts of Kupiansk, is that just like with all the other places over the last about 12 months where Ukraine has conducted a few times actually successful counterattacks and pushed Russia back here, in every single other case, it wasn't very much longer, just a few weeks and a couple of places a month, where all of those losses were recaptured and then went further. What do you think is going to happen here with Kupiansk?
I mean, the same thing as it was happening before. Russia is not wasting its personnel lives for no reason. And yes, if you look at it, not tactical is not interesting. Okay, that's how they, BS people who are basically, regular civilians. They don't understand the connection. But reality is that victories are won only on the operational strategic levels. Tactically, you can lose with a battalion and win the war. So the problem here is that.
And I'm sorry, that an example of that, correct me if I'm wrong, but is when the Russians chose to give up Kherson City in the first year of the war, a seemingly big tactical loss, but it was, I think, arguably a pretty substantial operational gain for the Russian side. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There was no necessity to defend the city, despite the fact that the Russians could. But they said, why should we? Especially when you consider the fact that half of the population of the city was utterly hostile to Russians. They obviously, when Russians withdrew under Surovikin's command at that time, they also took 110,000 people with them, those who wanted to stay with Russia. And so they evacuated 110,000 civilians. So after that, we know what happened. Actually, they thought that they have the good springboard, if you wish, for all these famous counteroffensives, which was unmitigated disaster. It was a catastrophe. So, and that's when the war was lost, actually, essentially. The same goes for Kursk, for example. And even that a lot which happened in Kursk initially was not so much due to their success as to the corruption of Kursk Oblast administration, which didn't build proper fortifications. They wasted money. So now they are obviously charged. They are still in the process of their court hearings and things like that, but they're probably going away for a very long time, if not for life. And so, but in the end, we knew what happened. They lost 80,000 people at the area of 159 square miles, which is the size of the New York proper. So that's really some achievement. That time it was British who were conducting this operation. But yeah, they will continue again. The tactical thing, move in, move out. The same like in Gurepole. There are Russian forces now operating in the center of the city. Okay, they might withdraw for a couple of days. The Ukrainians will run in and they say, oh yeah, we recaptured the city. No, you didn't, so, and it will continue, but I don't think, today I have the map, which is even more, it's now the Russians are inside the city, deep inside the city in the center. So, and so it doesn't matter. It's a tactical, things. They go back and forth. And when people see counterattack, they, again, as I already stated, they imagine all those columns of the Panzerkampfwagen, tigers and panthers, the Kursk scale battle. No, it's a probably platoon-sized force which conducts whatever, even including, what the recon in force or something like that. They try.
Sorry. So let me ask you, I want to shift gears back to the strategic level here in just a second, but I think it's important to lay the foundation for both the tactical and operation to see why the strategic is so much in Russia's favor and why I argue that they're going to be setting the terms. One other thing I want you to comment on here of late in the last, I guess, 36 hours or so, is that a Ukrainian underwater drone had significant damage against a Russian sub in base there.
No. And already have been debunked completely. Yeah, already have been debunked completely. They lie as always. The sub have been shown; it's still there. So they hit their peer way away from a sub. And the question is now not the fact that it was necessarily the operation from the outside, like this British guy's special boat service tried to conduct this. Yeah, it's nothing damaged, nothing except some damage to peer. And the question is that most likely the whole thing actually was done from the inside, and that could be the case because obviously the rat being in the midst of Russian rank and file, especially if, ranks. But it's for the FSB to deal with it. I mean, this is the thing which is probably, how to say it, the submarine isn't there. The video had been shown. A Russian Ministry of Defense issued official statement. Nothing have been damaged, and everything is just standard. So, and that's the problem. Even here on this video, it is shown that sub is fine. And but yeah, it's Ukraine, and this it's NATO curators. They need desperately some kind of their success. And yeah, there you go. They
okay. All right, so you see what at the most, there's some, I guess, some damage to the pier or so, but you see that the fleet itself, operationally, is not impacted in any case.
Yeah,
and that leads into the strategic here, and I want to go. So a lot of people have been talking in the West today, especially about what Merz said yesterday, standing next to Zelensky, about how they're close to an agreement. Kaya Kallas is saying, we're moving down a good path, but we have to get security guarantees. They've got to have teeth and a bunch of other stuff like that. Ryabkov has provided the only official Russian response yet. And there was, and listen, I got to give them credit. ABC News in the United States yesterday gave an extended interview, which I thought was very well done, very professional, very respectful. Actually, both the reporter and Ryabkov himself were very respectful of each other, which I appreciate. But the reporter asked some hard questions, and Ryabkov did not shy back from some of the answers. I want to show a few of those. And if you could kind of give us an idea about maybe a little bit beneath the surface of beyond what he says, what are some of the ramifications? And let's start off, first of all, and I got to admit, this one surprised me a little for reasons I'll explain in a second. But the very first words out of his mouth were, Ryabkov says he believes that they could be close to a negotiated settlement.
Very much confident and pretty sure that we are on the verge of resolving this terrible crisis. We are prepared to have a deal, to use the word of President Trump. And my hope, keep fingers crossed, would be that it comes sooner rather than later.
Now, the hope it comes sooner rather than later, that's one thing. You can hope that it does. But the first part, he said there, it's on the verge of something. And based on the things that he says after this, it doesn't really feel like the verge of anything.
I know. This is what Russian diplomats are good. I said it many times. Russian diplomats are experts in pulling the gonads of the cat for as long as necessary. And yes, you're absolutely correct. What went after that, that's where it all mattered. But I can tell you one thing. I mean, although, of course, not the level of the first deputy of the foreign minister as Ryabkov is, Russian ambassador Kellen to London. Yesterday, he just explained to British that, they also, got the interview with him. He said, the basically condition is the capitulation. He was more open about it because he can afford to be. But Ryabkov has to be extremely diplomatic. But in the end, what he stated after that introductory words, so to speak, speaks volumes. Because in the end, they are not close.
Well, and let's get right into that, because the next one, this one may be the most consequential of all the ones I'll show here, and that is he was asked about the issue of the territory, the 5 oblasts, counting Crimea. But I think what he said at the beginning, at the first part of this soundbite you're about to see, was really telling, because he basically says that in order to get to that good negotiated settlement he's talking about, Ukraine has to recognize that they are on the bottom side of the military dynamic.
We do what we do. We want to stop it. And whether it would be stopped depends much on how people who support authorities in Kyiv recognize the inevitable outcome of our success in this either in form of our military success or a compromise, a deal which may be achieved through diplomatic means, which we currently are focused on. Since 2022, the Donbas region, the two republics there, became integral parts of the Russian Federation through referenda which were held there. This is what we have in terms of Donbas. Beyond this, similar things happened in Zaporozhye and Kherson Oblast. So we have 4 entities currently which are integral parts of the Russian Federation. I'm not talking on Crimea. This is a story which dates back to 2014, as we all remember. So we have 5 altogether, and we are not able in any form to compromise on this, because it would be, in our view, a revision of a very fundamental element of our statehood.
So first, he's saying that the Ukraine side has to recognize that militarily they can't defeat Russia. And once they acknowledge that, then we can talk about negotiated settlement. And then the biggest one, I think, because there's been so much conversation in the United States and Western Europe over the past month or so with these claims that Russia has said they would entertain the possibility of having Ukraine withdraw from the Donbass, but that the line of contact would stay where it was for Kherson and Zaporizhia, and that Russia would somehow let that go. But he seemed to pretty much debunk that and says that he can't, and that it's part of the integral part of the Russian state. What does that tell you about how the negotiations are going?
Not well. It's not what Gregor correctly stated. It's an apple pie without apples, and without Russia, I mean, they can negotiate whatever they want. So, but yeah, in terms of Europe, it has to be understood that Russians view Europe as an existential enemy, and it is a fait accompli now. So there will be no return to normal relations with Europe, period. No matter what they do, because no matter who comes to power, if Europe still survives as the civilizational entity, they will be existential enemies of Russia and Russian people. And so what we have here is basically what, as a matter of fact, Peskov and same Rybkov and even Sergei Lavrov stated a couple of days ago. He stated, you wish to proceed with the negotiations, there are Trump 28 points, it has to be built around it. That's pretty much. Russians again give Trump administration the off-ramp. I know that they split now those, whatever, 28, 22, 42, I don't know, I lost count now, points into 4 batches, so to speak, of the problems. But again, the problem is they can negotiate whatever they want. In the end, they have to come to Moscow. And Moscow is in no mood to negotiate anything which is not stated since the times of the famous letter in December 2022, 21, pardon me, before the special military operation started. And so, what can I say? I mean, Rybkov is pretty, straightforward, really. There is no necessity to interpret it in any way. Of course, it will be, but what is most important is the change of the vector within the United States, even the establishment media. This is unheard of, that ABC comes to Rybkov and they talk, and it's like, wow, there's something going on. Again, Russia will talk to the United States, period. It's kind of courtesy of the superpowers have to afford each other, bearing the responsibility of not plunging the world into the World War III and nuclear exchange, God forbid, So the rest of it is secondary, and everybody has to understand Ukraine is not, autonomous entity. It is totally dependent entity and the proxy of the combined West. And the Russian strategic purpose, aim, especially in the latest couple of years, less than that, was to basically disassociate the United States from the Europeans and from this whole basically cabal of people who support Kiev regime. And evidently this is in a progress. Something is happening there. How it is happening, we don't know, of course. But yeah, it's obvious that something has been said to people in like ABC and others, they feel the wind change of the wind,
Yeah.
So okay, let's talk to Russians. Yeah, that's how it's.
Well, and in fact, one of the other things mentioned, there was two other times in this interview where Sergei Ryabkov mentioned talking to the United States, and both very honoring terms, if I can say that. The first one, which I'll play now, he was mentioning, listen, we're still ready to have a negotiation, which he said at the beginning, but it goes back to the terms that were discussed between Putin and Trump themselves in Anchorage, Alaska.
Yep.
President Putin said on several occasions that we stand firm on what was agreed in form of a framework while he and President Trump met in Anchorage, Alaska. Subsequently, there were several rounds conducted mostly by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Most recent round, he was accompanied by a well-known entrepreneur, Jared Kushner. They are now in Berlin. We have no clue, no idea what transpires there. My assumption would be, though, that the Ukrainian authorities, heavily backed by some European capitals, European leaders, anticipate a deep and, I would say, very wrong modification of the initial peace plan produced by the US side, which was discussed when Steve Witkoff was here in Moscow last.
So it seems to me that they're saying, yeah, listen, if there's going to be any modifications, there's not going to be any modifications because we've already agreed to that there. So whatever they're talking about in Europe, they can talk, I guess, kind of what you just said there.
Yeah, it's just the way it is. It's the matter for superpowers to decide. I've been on it, despite the fact that everything happens between Russia and the United States, especially militarily. Russians understand that they have to live with the United States because they not only perceive the United States is a great power. It's a great country with, what proud stance. Obviously, some of it obviously is unrealistic, but Russians give it due, So in terms of Europe, it's done. It's over. Russians, they view Europe as total existential enemy, which eventually has to be defeated, or European Union has to completely collapse. So goes for NATO, European part of NATO, and the regimes should change in Berlin, London, and Paris. But even that, even some new people come to power there, it's not going to change. Europeans have the 1,000-year-long hatred of Russians. And I'm not talking about political level hatred. It's a cultural, sometimes it's racial. And again, Europe was in business of getting invading Russia, getting it butt kicked out, and then repeating the cycle over and over again. Many people do not understand. Then even in 1242, 13th century. Remember this, basically the knights, and famous, Lake Peepers fight with the Alexander Nevsky, heading Russian forces, and they defeated those knights. And it's just always like that. You look attentively, the invasions are all the time. And then, of course, you have Poles who invaded Russia. You have obviously Napoleon, Hitler, and it's always Europe, European forces, which get in. Well, Crimean War, for crying out loud. Again, British, French, and Turks. These guys cannot live without invading Russia. Now that they are impotent economically and militarily, which they are, so the only thing which is left to them is to somehow try to play spoilers. They are in no league in terms of military industrial capability with the United States and Russia. And so what they're going to do for them, listen, London bet the house on Ukraine. They bet the house. Everything which was done there, including basically bankrupting themselves, was in the anticipation that Putin's regime will fall. Russians will remove him. Then Russians will be bogged down in Ukraine those people are not very bright people. And I wrote 4 books on it in the second decade. I'm writing the blog about it. Those people do not understand technological, industrial, scientific, cultural dimension of war. They don't. when their war in military history is basically nothing more than confabulation, fairy tales. And the same goes to a large degree to the United States, but at least in the United States, I know many military people who say, yeah, it's kind of right, at least there is a critical view on that, but on Europeans, you have this bunch of the, French armed forces, which I joke, remove the nuclear, basically deterrent. They have nothing. Same goes for British, same goes for Bundeswehr. They still believe in this, fairy tales. They believe in Hollywood version of history. They don't understand that Russians take them very seriously. And if need be, God forbid, of course, Europe can be turned into the parking lot. If it comes down that these idiots decide to do something, which they don't have resources.
Let's certainly hope it doesn't. That would be
bad
for
God forbid,
everyone would be losing if that happens. But I kind of wonder if one of the subtle messages from Rybakov in this interview was that understanding that he's kind of sidelining Europe, and in this little piece here, he's actually going to say some pretty complimentary things about the current administration and about how they're willing to talk. But I think there's also a subtler message in here that, listen, we were close to having a deal in Istanbul in 2022, so don't mess it up this time. Watch.
We are appreciative of the efforts which President Trump and his people and his team apply to this situation, which needs to be looked in its entirety if we really want a sustainable solution that addresses both root causes of the conflict and also some very acute situations. In fact, the more we wait, the harder it would be. I think we were inches before a complete conclusion of the efforts in 2022. Now it's much more difficult. It's more complicated what we have before us. And difference in approaches are also so very obvious, but thus we only need to redouble efforts to bridge those differences. And we're prepared to do so.
Now, let me ask that question on the last part where he says we're still ready to bridge those differences. But as we just talked about the differences he talked about at the first part of that interview, especially about the 5 oblasts, we'll keep it at the 4.
Out of the question,
that doesn't seem bridgeable to me. So what does he mean by that?
Oh, he means, for example, the buffer zone. Many people forget that Russians are now 40 kilometers deep in Kharkov. They are 20 kilometers deep in Sumy. They are all over the place. And so these are what is called, they're building the buffer zones. And they may go and say, okay, we're not going to, take Kharkov, for example. Not that really Russians need to do that, but we can move security zone a little bit, further to the east. And that type of things. But reality is the key phrase here, which has been repeated, I lost the count how many times. It's called root causes. And root causes, we know what the root causes are. These are the expansion of NATO and, of course, bringing up the Nazi regime and proxy. The best proxy combined West ever had in Ukraine. So Russians understand this from the very practical national security point of view, and they're not going to compromise on that. Simple as that. It just doesn't matter. And the only thing is that's why I want to go to Ambassador Kellen in London, Russian ambassador, who spoke to one of these, they don't have any other than tabloid, the garbage media in United Kingdom. And he said, we advanced just fine. And the guy, this reporter, whatever, journalist, some kind of creep, but it's very slow. And he tells him, yeah, that's what you write in your newspapers. Many people, again, as I already stated, the political top in the West, it is utterly militarily incompetent. Utterly, just take anybody, person who is in the charge of the policies, all those rand guys, political scientists, all those, people who have no clue about what real war is, and actually to a certain extent, even the parts of military. And you cannot explain to them that the actual thing which is happening, and I will repeat it again, it sounds horrible. I'm not enjoying saying this. I understand the human dimension of all that. However, I hate, for example, Kiev regime. But Russians are in the business of the annihilating of the sperm bank of the nation which betrayed Russians. And we're talking about Ukrainians. So, and when you look at actually the scale of casualties on Ukrainian side, it's basically the end of the nation in physical terms. And as many Russians say, including professionals, until they start throwing in those women, Ukrainian women, who actually are more sadistic. Well, actually, it's more sadistic sometimes, some of them are at the front than even men. They will not understand, and they will just basically cease to exist as a nation.
Well, and as it turns out, there are those in the United States. Gary, if you can get that John Bolton ready to fly up here, he was given his opinion as a friend to the Ukraine side, how they can presumably turn this around. But check out this recommendation.
And I think this is advice from a friend. I think they need to lower their draft age from 25 to 18 to get more manpower on the battlefield and to make sure that the country as a whole is bearing the burden of this war equally.
So from a military perspective, if they add all the 18-year-olds that are still left in the country, will that change the military balance on the front line?
They will be all killed. John Bolton is a coward, and he draft dodger, and basically he is the man who has no humanity in him left. I mean, he's a wild creature. So, and he can suggest whatever he wants, but he doesn't understand the first thing about war. And so, and I mean real war. He also grew up and have been formed by all those wonderful fairy tales about how Patton was about to enter Moscow and defeat Stalin and things of this nature. So, but I mean, yeah, it's like he's a war criminal. That's who he is. And he should be behind bars for many reasons, but we're not going to go there. But yeah, his advice is just, let's kill more Ukrainians. That's the only thing he knows. He won't understand that the guy won't be able to command a squad in the real combat situation. He has no background for it. Forget about him spewing this BS about their, strategic level decisions. But even criminals in Kyiv understood that they cannot touch these 18-year-olds because this is the last remaining sperm bank from which they can respond. Basically, whatever will be left of Ukraine. And so Russians don't mind. They say, send us whatever you want. If it's going to be 18 years old, and some of them are already being both taken prisoners of war and killed on the front lines, they will just kill them. Simple as that. And again, people do not understand the operational statistics. Operational, not tactical. We're talking about operational level of the divisions, level of the Army Corps, and even general staff in terms of the data they operate with. It's leaks sometimes. We're looking at the kill ratio of around 1 to 30. It's just
hard to fathom. Let me ask you a couple of real quick things about what the Russians may or may not be willing to do on some of the other key aspects of these deal that's attempting to be sought here. Number one is on the security guarantees, because it depends on how you define security guarantees. Kai Kallis was saying earlier, I guess it was yesterday, these things need to be not just paper, but they need to have teeth and troops and all that can actually threaten Russia. And my initial thought was Russia would just categorically say, no, we're not going to be doing that. But apparently, and I don't remember if Ryabkov said it here, but certainly some others in Russia have, that there are certain conditions that they would be willing to entertain any kind of some security guarantees. What would that look like?
Difficult to say, really. Russians can obviously play all kinds of the games here because they have escalation dominance and they are winning. They already won. I'm sorry. It was during this interview. Ryabkov was asked about the presence of any NATO troops for the security guarantees, and he said no, absolutely no NATO troops, period, whether under the NATO auspices or independent. But he said he would not rule out other troops from presumably other countries outside of Europe. Yeah, like India, for example. Yeah, peacekeepers, beyond those buffer zones. And keep in mind this other thing. Russians can say, how about North Koreans? Why not? So there are all kinds of the possibilities there. And again, non-European, non-NATO, period. This is not negotiable. The rest of it, I don't know. But as we already stated, the fundamental conditions of this are very simple. Those 5 regions, forget about it. They are taken out of the equation. The buffer zone could be there, played with, I think. But again, we have to wait and see. And Ryabkov states very clearly, and I quote, the longer it goes, the worse it's going, the harder it will be for Europe and, just to decide anything on this issue. But in the end, Russians are in it, which already happened. It's just the arrangement phase. In it for historic defeat of the combined West. Because, as I already stated many times, we are witnessing the closing salvas of the World War II. Europe learned absolutely nothing from World War II. Nothing, zero. And a strategic purpose of Russia was always to avoid nuclear war and to somehow extricate United States from this equation, because, as I already stated, superpowers moving in the different universe, they have different responsibilities and things of this nature. And so this pretty much happened already. So now it is, and plus Russians are waiting just for the heck of it. Yeah, maybe Europeans will find the guts and the balls, pardon my French, to basically remove those essentially criminal governments. They say that, oh yeah, Macron has the approval rating of 11%. But listen, we have been through this before. Hollande had low approval rating. These guys in France, they repeat and elect this type of people over and over again, because evidently they are so pacified and docile and so emasculated, all those Europeans, they just go, with the flow. The only thing they care about is the bread and circuses. And that's largely true, because unlike Americans, and I'm talking about like America, Russian American here, we have this, which is actually very healthy trait in it's a kind of paranoid thing about the government and all this, and that is why obviously under the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment we have very huge access to the alternative media. You saw yourself what happened to Jacques Beau. And this is just absolutely incredible. Europeans don't have this act. They don't care. Most of them anyway. Some of them obviously go to the websites and alternative media like we are doing it here. But majority are just fine. They are content with what is happening with their countries. And the only thing they care about, which is normal, make no mistake, I'm not saying that this is wrong. The only thing they care about is their stomach, period. France tomorrow may cease to exist. It is reflected in national security strategy by the White House a week ago. Europe essentially stops being Europe, period. European nations will disappear, like French will disappear. It's not about if they disappear. The question is when they disappear, because they glide constantly about the demographics, for example, in France. German men, the only thing they care about beer and football. That's the only thing. They don't have guts to defend their women. They didn't nothing. The same goes for UK. Good Lord, it's turning.
Yeah, and I want to get to the UK stuff here in just a second. But before that, I want to shift to the other really important figure in all of this. So if we're talking about Europe, if we're talking about the United States, we're certainly talking about Russia. There's one other figure that has to be considered, whether we want to or not, and that is Volodymyr Zelensky.
That's exactly where the real path to peace begins. It's not enough to force Russia into a deal. It's not enough to make it stop killing. We must make Russia accept that there are rules in the world and that it cannot deceive everyone. This is the path to lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, together with partners, we are working not only to stop the bloodshed, but to change the situation along Russia's borders so there is no opportunity to start another war. And we understand that criminals don't change in a day. That's why the talks these days are not only about ceasefire, but about security guarantees. This is not only about diplomacy, not only about physical security. It's also about making Russia finally learn to live by the rule of law.
So all he's asking is to demonize Russia, to force them to learn to live by Western preferences, which he calls law, and that we have to force them to do what Ukraine wants. Other than that, I think that there's room to negotiate. What do you say?
Well, yeah, it's Zelensky, okay? And Europeans already degraded themselves. Nothing's, I'm not surprised. That's who they are. By accepting this well, basically a war criminal and drug addict. Well, they are probably supporting him, his drug habit. And the puppet, he is a puppet of MI6 and puppet of London, essentially. Well, the only thing is now how they want to off him. The main question remains, and if Russians will be able to save him before he is offed by SAS, who guard him. So is there a possibility of this? We don't know. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. But the point is that, yeah, sure, he can say whatever he wants, and those morons from Europe, they can listen to whatever they want. They are irrelevant here. They have no bearing whatsoever, except trying to do what they actually can do through the globalist elites in the United States. And there are plenty of those in Washington, D.C., and they have their very keen connection with their brethren in Europe. The same, fanatics from the Davos culture, all those Council on Foreign Relations, all kinds of those people. They try to sabotage any kind of the movement. Okay, they can sabotage it. Let's see what's going to happen. So they do not understand, essentially, the foundation of all that. So in this case, Zelensky can say whatever he wants. Who cares? It means absolutely nothing.
Now, one thing in the last few minutes we have here, you mentioned British a minute ago. I want to kind of look at this in the last section here in the historical context. And Sergei Ryabkov mentioned earlier about the 2022 deal in Istanbul that almost was inches away, to use his words. We were very close, in his common knowledge now. Boris Johnson, probably with a lot of help from Joe Biden after that, sabotaged that, and we know what all happened since then. Now then, here we are where Trump is now trying to get this done. According to some media reports, he's given Zelensky a Christmas deadline, so just barely over a week from now, to have some agreement, or he'll walk. I don't know. He said that many times, and he hasn't walked, so I'll believe that when I see it. But nevertheless, he's still trying to get this done. In light of that, in light of these comments that are coming out from Russia yesterday, and all of the diplomatic activity that Trump has been doing personally in Alaska or with Witkoff and all these rounds back and forth, UK comes out yesterday, and there's two incredibly important, at least from the perspective of British, in light of all this trying to get these negotiations done. Why would one expect, if they're trying to agree with the United States to get the war over with, would you hear the following from the new MI6 leader, which you've mentioned a couple of times, and one of the senior military officers of London?
We all continue to face the menace of an aggressive, expansionist and revisionist Russia seeking to subjugate Ukraine and harass NATO. I find it harrowing that hundreds of thousands have died, with the toll mounting every day because of Putin's historical distortions and his compromised desire for respect. He is dragging out negotiations and shifting the cost of war onto his own population. But Putin should be in no doubt. Our support is enduring. The pressure we apply on Ukraine's behalf will be sustained, because it is fundamental not just to European sovereignty and security, but to global stability.
And I know I don't need to tell this audience that while the price of peace may be rising, the cost of strong deterrence is still far, far less than the cost of war. Sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a part to play, to build, to serve, and if necessary, to fight. And more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means.
You know, it's one thing for an MI6 to say they're going to demonize Russia. I mean, that's kind of what they do.
That's what they do, yeah.
But it's, of course, during this time, it should be noteworthy in Washington. They should know it. But for this air marshal here to say, hey, sons and daughters of UK, British citizens, you need to be ready. British families, you need to be ready to sacrifice your lives to fight Russia. I mean, how is this working? And what do you think is going to result in British?
Well, the only thing British has left from once great country and great culture, first, they never were good at the combined arms, okay? They never. So, and again, that is why Stalin demanded in Tehran that actually American general commanded the landing in Normandy. A well-known fact. He didn't want British to be there. So, yeah, they are basically stacked up morons. Basically, you look at actually their military, their officer corps is a joke. Their military is a joke. Their nuclear deterrent is basically American one. It is because the United States provides them with the Trident 2D5 missiles, which they carry, 2 or 4 per 16 silos submarine, the only one they can put to sea. So basically, if you have these ambitious people who live in an alternative universe who believe that they somehow UK matters, it doesn't. It's a second-rate, it's third-rate actually, military power. They cannot put together a single motor rifle brigade. And so, but yeah, they for some reason think that they're so great. And when you look at their military institutions and their actually military education, how they prepare officer corps, it is pathetic, really. That is why they continue to basically purge hot air. They don't understand what's going to happen. Well, for example, in terms of this lady Mitrovelli, whose original name is actually Dobrovolskaya, and her grandfather was the Nazi collaborator, which was a huge scandal actually in United Kingdom when she was appointed, being most likely DEI, because she's lady, let's get the first MI6, they believe in the James Bond movies. So, but these guys, including this Royal United Service Institute, they are complete incompetent militarily, not understanding that the war with Russia, God forbid, if they really believe that they can fight it, it will end really fast for United Kingdom. That's what they don't understand. And at some point of time, Londoners may wake up and they suddenly recognize that there is no 10 Downing Street and there is no MI6 headquarters together with Ministry of Defense. But the rest of London will be fine. So they don't understand.
The curiosity that while she's saying this, while the air marshal is saying this, the BBC of all places about a week or so ago published a resource or a study that showed that if unexpectedly UK did go to war with Russia or anyone in a high intensity warfare, they would be able to sustain combat operations for a few weeks. That's what they said. On top of what you just mentioned there about maybe they would get a combat brigade if they could scrounge it up today.
Yeah.
With that kind of minuscule military capacity, why in the world are they talking with such cocky statements?
Well, because the whole degenerate British elite, most of it is degenerate. It's inbred, incestuous, and we know the cases of pedophilia. And this is just sewer, okay? Human sewer from their political top, most of it to their media. They want to stay in power because at some point of time, when you look attentively, even at the World Bank data, in the last 20 years, actually economy and basically GDP per capita, as fake as GDP data is, have been shrinking in the United Kingdom. If you take a look today at the United Kingdom, what it has become, it looks like the third world in many places. London, beyond the touristy places, it's a dump. Londoners themselves say this. They wanted it. And so what they have left, as I already stated, they bet the house because due to the fact that this Chatham House is a bunch of clowns who have no clue about anything, especially in Russia. They always lived in this alternative universe. And so those Thatcherites and whatever the hell other, globalists there, they bet the house. Their idea was that, Russians will bog down in, Ukraine in 2022. Putin, the regime will be removed as they thought because they are militarily incompetent. Any British general is militarily incompetent. They believed that somehow Soviet army lost the war in Afghanistan, and because of that, Soviet Union collapsed. It has nothing to do with Afghanistan, but you cannot explain it to them, because they need to believe in their fairy tales. And as the result, when in 2022, nothing happened, Putin's approval ratings went through the roof, unlike it was the histories of all kinds of the so-called, opposition figures who were basically selling them BS. They were drinking their own Kool-Aid. And 23 complete catastrophe, military catastrophe on the front. They killed now 80,000 in Kursk, and look where we are. And Putin's approval ratings are through the roof. Russia is doing fine economically. And suddenly, everything they invested, I'll just give you one example. They say, we're not going to insure Russian ships. They don't understand whom they are dealing with. Russia said, oh, hell with you. Okay, we'll insure them ourselves. Russia is so much more powerful than United Kingdom that they still cannot comprehend this. They still believe that they represent some kind of the force. They don't. And as the result, they continue to live in this delusion and, folie de grandeur, because, they think that they're so grand. They are not. And as the result, their elites now facing that they're bankrupted country, and Europe is bankrupt together with it. And basically the reign of the Western Europe as the civilization which shaped our world for the last 500 years is over. And actually nobody is sure that even English people, basically, genetics will survive when you consider what is happening now. And United Kingdom is barely stitching itself together with Scotland constantly having all kinds of the, irredentism, so to speak. And so what's left?
So let me ask you this, and we just have a few minutes left here. Where is this going? So Trump is apparently given a deadline by Christmas. UK is clearly doing everything it can to sabotage this, so there is no negotiation. And it looks to me like we'll probably roll into the new year where we started this year, almost, except that there's been a whole lot more Ukrainian troops have been killed over the year. And apparently, we didn't even talk about this, but the Ukrainian energy grid system is on life support, and potentially in the first part of January, it could be knocked out entirely. I just talked to somebody who just got back from Kiev, and they said that for the regular people, they have about 6 hours of power per day in Kiev. And in other places, it's even less than that. And even that could get knocked out. Where is this going in the first of 2026?
I mean, it's contingency planning. You know extremely well about it. Contingencies, look at the contingencies, look at the scenarios. Russians have the answer for, including their ultimate scenario where, as you correctly stated, the grid will be completely destroyed, which is about to. And Ukraine will cease to exist as the essentially modern country. Simple as that. After that, whatever the Ukrainians do with their government, if they want to continue to do whatever they believe, because they are brainwashed, very many of them, actually majority, and so they still believe all those fairy tales because it is a completely totalitarian country. And so Russians will finish off their industry of Ukraine, and then it's a Morgenthau plan, essentially agricultural, whatever is going to be left of it, and that's where it is all going. After that, I mean, if Europe wants to follow the Ukraine's fate, they probably will. Because obviously, first, United States is not going to provide cover all necessities, including for the even very high price, which already European economy is not competitive. France, Germany are out, period. And so the only thing is that's why Trump wanted in this, and its national security strategy, they want to remove, obviously, as you know, apart from Hungary, they want to remove Italy from this basically dying continent. It was stated clearly by a number of Trump officials, and in national security strategy, essentially that's what they said for a simple reason. Rome, the birthplace of the Western civilization. The rest of it, the hell with it. Basically, that's what it is all about. And this is the greatest geopolitical tectonic change we observed in the last 500 years. And it's the closing, salvos of the World War II. Simple as that. And Europe was the birthplace of Nazism and essentially the greatest invasion of the Soviet Union, where it was defeated. They evidently didn't understand that there have been their Nazi ideas, under the guise of all the democratic rhetoric, have been preserved. Like, take a look at Madame Machiavelli, who has the Nazi in her, look at the Germans, scratch any guy, including nerds or whoever. All Nazis, family of Nazis. You have essentially resurgence of the Nazis under the guise of democratic rhetoric and all BS, while turning Europe in the sewer, it's the playground for Satanists, and the totalitarian, essentially unified state. And looks like somebody in Trump administration, by publishing the national security strategy, they understood it, which is good. I mean, it's a revolutionary sense that even those terms have been used there.
Well, and I certainly hope that that's where President Trump himself, despite whoever may have actually written that document, I hope it influences his decisions, because it is, I think it could be catastrophic for the United States itself in 2026 if Trump doesn't, I say, man up and pull the trigger and just say, okay, you guys are on your own, because we're not going to continue to underwrite known disaster and known failure here. Because I think if he doesn't, it could get really ugly for everybody. But it's pretty clear where this is going to go on the battlefield, as you've said many times. So thank you for providing that kind of clarity. We really appreciate it. And as a reminder, too, to everybody to go to Smoothie X12, where you can get more of Andrei. You don't have to wait till he comes here every week, because he's got some great stuff, too. And I bet here in the next few days, you're going to have even more. So look forward to that. And we look forward to seeing you the next time. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
And we appreciate you guys, too. Be sure, and by the way, like and subscribe if you haven't done that. Also, we go to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere you get your podcast. Let your friends know. I know a lot of folks really like the podcast even more than the videos. Hard to believe, though it may be, but share the wealth with them and let them know, folks. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.